Da 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 da. What's my good cheer? Welcome, everybody. Let's give YouTube a couple of minutes, get those notifications out, let people know I've gone live. And if you've never met me before, hi, I'm Cindy. I explore the inside and the outside. Monday to Fridays, I try to come in within a couple of minutes of 9 o'clock in the evening. And it's a nice wind down time. I never know what flows, but at the same time, in knowing, not knowing, right? I have a feeling all the time that it's going to help us, right? In some way that makes it, I don't know, maybe we're bad sleepers, maybe it makes us so we sleep a little bit better. Sometimes, we stress out about things, especially if you got big projects at work or, there are meetings and things. Who knows? It's a variance of things that could be stressing us out over the course of the day. But you know what? It wears on us sometimes, and sometimes we focus on it so much that we just can't even fall asleep. I'm very grateful for my good sleeping habits, I have to say. But I have noticed in the past week or so that the temperatures have not been comfortable for me. I recently lost my big fans. I am somebody who does appreciate the motor and the air blasting in my face when I'm sleeping. Helps to regulate that heat sometimes that you get overly warm because you're using too many blankets or your pajamas are too warm, or right, you went to bed, you were kind of cold, so you left your socks on. And lots of different reasons that you find that sometimes that you're not even comfortable, that you can't find a proper spot. And for myself, that is something that I have to take note of, because that's something that is not the norm for me. I do, on purpose, change my sleeping habits. I try to bring change into my life in experimentation, to see what works for me and what doesn't work for me. One of those examples is getting up at 7 o'clock in the morning. I have been doing that probably for a half a dozen years now. And on the norm, my body is so regulated to the alarm that even if I am tossing and turning and I'm not able to fall asleep and stuff, my eyes pop open 3 or 4 minutes before that alarm goes off. I beat the alarm almost every single day. But it's kind of like in that body regulation, like we have our own stopwatch, our own alarm system going on in our bodies that we regulate. And I find that as you become more mature, that you're getting up in the middle of the night to empty the bladder, and you recognize that, oh my goodness, these are those signals of, right, that we are maturing, that we are getting older. I remember a time, even in my late 20s, early 30s, that I get up in the morning for a morning pee, and I wouldn't have another one till I went to bed at night, right? I don't know if that was a good thing, but it was the way that I ran my system. And I was pretty proud of my good bladder, especially when I go out shopping with my sisters and stuff, and they'd be scoping out the restrooms and stuff right off the hop. We just got out of the car and they're already scoping out, right? And I never ever had those issues. And I guess that's part of those little things that you get off your plate if you're not worrying and stressing about those things. Hello, Melvin. Hello, Melvin. Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Me too. Yeah, Melvin's been with me for a while. It's good to hear that you're cheery. I always considered that you were always cheery. You're always cheery when you pop in here, Melvin, you know, I would like to think that if you're not cheery at some point, right, you popped in, don't say you're happy. Don't pretend that you're happy. You don't have to entertain me for right. I'm not here to entertain you, though sometimes I think the only way that you guys will hang out with me is in that moment that I've said something silly or I've misstepped myself or have forgotten where I am, and I'm already saying, okay, Cindy, get to the main branch, right? And I've already dissipated in my thoughts and where I was going. It usually doesn't take much, and I'll just move into something else. You know, as we we were talking about being mature and everything, we tend quite often to look back at our lives and all those missteps and all those things that we got right, the things that we got wrong, those little tweaks that we wish sometimes that we could go back and fix in some of those relationships that in a moment we might not have appreciated it until it was gone. But if you had the moment to go back to that moment and, say, thank you for being my friend. Thank you for being so kind to me, right? Thank you for taking care of me. Thank you for being my mom. Thank you for being my dad. Those are beautiful moments that very rarely happen in our lives, right? For the most part, we're on our own in the at the end, right? It has been a kind of generational norm, and and not only that, we're getting so medically well in our systems, like our well-being physically, mentally, emotionally has improved. I know lots of people don't think it has, but that's just media. That's social media. That's somebody trying to make $1 off of you, right? But I see all the great going on. And it's really important for us to recognize the good that's going on because we're just recognizing all the things that are not what we're not getting right, right? Those missteps, those faults that we think we've had our entire lives and we think we'll never be able to resolve them. And, it's in listening to others, right? And it usually is in the sale of something, right? And it might not be a money exchange or anything. Sometimes it's a straight up exchange, fair trade. Sometimes, it is in that influence that, to make somebody feel not so on even keel with the other folk that are around them, right? We are all different. We all come from different cultures, different political ideas, right? Different religious ideas. And when that happens, there is a bit of dance in being able to be respectful and courteous and be a good neighbor because we are so amalgamated, so assimilated right now in all these aspects, and all it is an adjustment for us to just feel a little bit more comfortable. And that is a process, but sometimes those processes can move really, really fast. It could just start with a little black girl sitting on a seat of an all white school bus, you know? It could be somebody that just wants to make a difference in the world and just finds a way to resolve a big problem like, insulin, to be able to make these marks in life that make life a little bit better. But again, we just focus on what we're not getting right, and we don't allow ourselves any rope. But I think we've gotten to that point that it's like dominoes, isn't it? It's like one of those popsicle stick castles that, the pickup sticks, or monkey in a barrel. That's what it was in the 70s. That you just miss one, you just come offline of one, and everything can crumble, right? And again, being in this world where we're all this close to each other and we are bombarded by information, it's important for us to recognize what is hooey fooey, what is a big money grab, what is a power trip, and what is actually good information, and be able that to recognize the truthfulness, the reality, the evidence in what you're looking to resolve, and the resources that you're looking at, because there's so much out there, you guys, so much. And I cover a lot of miles in what I do, and I try to keep it equally. And but I have this feeling that one day this digital age, right, is going to crash on us. I will still have the outside, right? But while I have these platforms, while this is all new and I am on an even keel with others in that process of learning AI, and believe me, there are people out there that are so smart in it and have been in it for decades. Remember, it was like the late 70s when all of this started moving, right? And we have come so far in that short span. I would I was going to say I would like to think, but I'm not quite sure that I would like to be seeing what the world's going to look like in another 50 years, at how far we've come. I don't think that we are mentally or emotionally ready, right? We are all diving into territories that we don't recognize, and we're feeling our way around. And right, we are getting trapped in what we're interested in, right? Because it's all so close now. It's something that you can do on your own, and when you're all programmed, right, to think that you can't do anything, right? It's like when I was a kid, somebody say I can't do that, I would just go up. You can't climb that tree. You're just too big, right? You can get caught in the branches. I'll show you. And and you challenge yourself. I knew my limitations, right? I wasn't going to race anybody down the street or on the sports track at school, right? I knew where my limitations were in that. And so, but that served me too, because I knew that I didn't have to put that effort in. But then again, I didn't have to, but I could have chosen to, couldn't I? I could have ran those tracks, and I could have continued to run those tracks, and I could have created a totally different life for myself. But in my choices, I chose something else. I chose the lazy way. I chose the safe way. I chose the comfortable way, right? And sometimes that doesn't serve you. And when you live in a world when we have choices where we can actually make an impact, right? You have to recognize, firstly, that impact is on ourselves. Even for myself, I show up here every single day, right? Well, 6 days a week. I don't show up online on Saturdays. I take a day off, but you know, I am swept up and I am obsessed and with what I do, but I enjoy what I do so much. And then I think to myself, you know, is is this any different than somebody sitting on the couch with a controller and playing Nintendo? And I think it is because, like I said, sometimes I think that this is just so good. This is so perfect. Like, who would have known 50 years ago that this was going to be happening, that I would be able to come in live like I am in this moment. We could have these kind of conversations, that I would even think to have these kind of conversations. It's absolutely amazing. And I don't think I would be where I am right now. And I don't think it was expected, right? Because this was not known, right? This was a dream. This was a vision. This was a goal. This wasn't a reality. And now we're seeing that it's a reality and it hasn't been that long. And so I say, what's the next 50 years going to look like? Right? I am optimistic it's going to look pretty good, right? Because I'm an optimistic person and I know I'm going to do my share, and I know that AI has all this amazing information right now, because if I'm sharing, there are a gazillion people sharing their magic, all those people who never thought they had a voice, right? That they would never be able to say their piece and be taken for that. Possibly, maybe not in this lifetime, but for posterity, right? You could pick up your phone, right? You could do a video. I used to do video diaries all the time. I haven't done one for a long time. It's been a couple of years, I think, that I've done a video diary. I should do one. And that's when I just go in, I video myself, and I spew everything that's with me, right? And it's not all that I share here online. I'm making movement outside of what's going on my brand. And yet in this moment I have nowhere to share that. I have places I can come in here and share that, but I don't want to add to that plate. I want to keep it as compact, right? And as simple. And it's not like those lessons are not going to be there. They are there, but it's just a matter of where's the storage. And it's a good idea. It's time for a video diary. And I yap. I usually yap for 10 minutes a few times, and then it just automatically gets uploaded to my Google Photos, and it's just there, right? It's just there. And like I said, Cindy might not be here in 50 years, right? Yeah, I will have been passed away for 2 years. I may be aiming for 114 years old. 114, so 40 years. I don't know, maybe 50 years. But yeah, okay. So where was I at that? Let's just pull it back to the main tree, Cindy. Okay. It's not coming back. It might pop in just as a reminder to say I need a little bit more time. I got my cards here, you guys. If you don't know, these are 54 powerful words. They're just powerful words. And lots of times we have things come across our path that we're meant to pick up, right? We're meant to think about them. Sometimes it's a conversation, sometimes it's an experience, sometimes it's a mishap, a big problem. Sometimes you really messed up and you're scrambling a little bit, but there are always lessons in that. And because we're so wrapped up in the hairy, scary of the moment, we don't appreciate why these things come across our path, why these conversations, experiences, heartbreak, grief, right? Any one of them. And when you don't pay attention, I'm a big believer that sometimes you'll get another shot at it. That an hour later, right? You'll get the same message, but in a different way instead of an experience. Maybe you'll have a conversation, right? And hopefully it doesn't get to the point where, the piano falls on your head before you get the message. But this is what I find, because in the morning, if I pull a card for myself, I'll just pay attention to my day and how that word pops up in my day, in my life, and just see if there is a message there, something I didn't notice before. And I can almost guarantee you'll find not one, not two, you'll find numerous things during the course of the day. And it's just the evidence for yourself to say, oh my goodness, I really am not paying attention as much as I thought I was. Right? Okay, you guys, let's pick the word. You guys know the scoop. I go into the word. It's the first thing that pops into my mind is what I start with. Who knows where it ends? It ends up. Sometimes it is just a couple of minutes. Sometimes like you guys know, I like the side branches. And sometimes it's just a matter of working with something that you don't really have in that moment a good perspective about. So in the moment, sometimes you'll find I'm working through it, right? Okay, the word. This is crazy because this word came across my path. I would have to say three or four times today. I think a couple of times we're in the same conversation, the same content that I was into. But we also had this word, right? Just was it yesterday or the day before? It's you guys, 54 powerful words. This is what I'm saying. Sometimes we don't pay attention, right? Because remember, I pulled this card and I went, "Oh my goodness, this topic's come across my path a few times just today, right? From two different conversations at least, and then insights that I come across my path." Ugh, are you kidding me? The word, you guys, the word we got today, you heard it. We got freedom again, you guys. Freedom is the choice to dictate for ourselves. You know, I believe that a lot of my missteps in life have been avoided through the lessons I've received in my experience, right? Growing up, in my young adulthood, in my heartbreaks, in my griefs, in my frustrations. But it is in that being able to figure it out for myself, right? To figure it out for myself. Whether I get that right or wrong, that's right. I'd like to think that I get it right, but I know I don't always get things right. You do the very best that you can in analyzing any experience, conversation, or experience that we have, but we got to understand that we only have that control for ourselves, right? We only can express how we feel, and whether we do it with our voices or whether we do it in an action, right? That's what we can do. and that's our freedom to have that prerogative, right? Was it's like part of the Americans Constitution, isn't it, that every person gets the right to have a say. That's a freedom. I think that Constitution, I'm not an American, but that Constitution had a lot of freedom in mind when it was being put together, when those conversations were being had, right? And that when we got this word the other day and we were talking about freedom, I remember referencing a little bit, one of my dear friends, him saying, for freedom for him was not to be working for the man, to be able to be his own man. And then I remember saying, freedom for myself is to be able to make those decisions. But that's a privilege, right? That's freedom, is to be able to make those decisions. And, freedom, you know, you can't say freedom comes at a cost, right? But freedom is a gift. Freedom is a privilege, right? If you go back to slavery in the 1800s and the 1700s, right? That they would have done anything just to be able to say, I'm not going out to the fields today, right? But that wasn't a possibility. We look at freedom and we think uh, for freedom that it is in that decision whether or not we're going to go to school today, or whether we're going to go to work today, right? Or in that freedom to make a decision because we don't agree with what the government is doing or thinking or saying or expecting, and or just even our own communities, right? And that freedom is that individualness that each one of us gets to have. And sometimes it's only a minuscule, right? Sometimes that freedom is only in what's here because again we only have control over our own actions and not the actions and the thoughts of others, right? So you know that freedom is the choice to dictate for ourselves, not dictate for others, but being the evidence. I used to joke all the time, and I'd reference my brother-in-law too. He was a narcissist from hell, but he was a smart one. He was just mean, right? And he was a know-it-all, but he knew his stuff, right? But that's the thing with narcissists too. They don't want to be showing up in weakness. They don't want to be showing up in being inexperienced in what they're beefing off about. So they're hard on themselves. They push to be the experts in their field so that they can beef off and yell at you when you get something wrong and explain to you for an hour and a half how to do it right. I'm just thinking of my brother-in-law, right? But I couldn't do anything for that. I right, because I could only control my own actions. And in that moment of agitations, because you know how empaths and narcissists mix well, that lots of times we are butting heads, and there's still pride there that's only an opposites of each other, right? So of course there's going to be agitation in that. And so it's in that those values I keep talking about, that those base values, if we could all learn to live by them, that we could make some huge movement for the next 50 years, right? So freedom is the choice to dictate for ourselves. Oh my goodness. I remember another thing today that came across my path when I was seeing that these things, because I remember grouching at the TV too with one of the characters who was talking about it, right? Freedom is the choice to dictate for ourselves. I'm going to use my own life as an example. I don't know if I ever talked about this before, but my parents had decided that, their kids were going to grow up with free choice. And it's something particularly that I recognized, right? That even when I wasn't woke to these ideas, I just thought my parents were forward thinking. I thought they were modern. It was the middle of, right, the hippie era and stuff. And my dad was a big experimenter too. And, nobody was going to tell him how to raise his family and, right, live his life. And that's the thing though, that word dictate. And I was dictated, all us kids were, but parents gotta dictate, otherwise the kids get themselves into trouble, or they get themselves hurt, or they get themselves into situations. So there is a certain amount of dictation that we have to take from our parents, right? And having that free choice, it was something that I did notice that, I would get in trouble for things that just seemed reasonable, that just seemed to make sense, that seemed to be the right thing. And then, right, because guilt and shame was my steering wheel, when I do something wrong and I just like, oh my goodness, I'm going to get in trouble. And I'd be all nervous and stressed out, right? My mother found out I do something wrong. Oh my goodness, right? And then they would find out, and I wouldn't get in trouble for that. And I always found that curious that, I would get away with this obvious stuff, like, hollowing out a chocolate cake that was supposed to be dessert for dinner, and all it is the icing part, and the cake is bowing now because there's no support underneath and stuff, and not get in trouble for that, and yet be totally clueless as to why I'm getting smacked upside the head or punished or whatever it was that was going on. That, it left me confused. It left me dazed. It left me hurt. I felt like, the little dog that was being punished in the moment because, dad came home, the dog peed on the floor at some point during the course of the day, and dad grabs the dog and smudges his face in the pee. But the dog was just happy to see dad walk in the door, right? It doesn't know why it's getting its face smudged into the pee, right? It's a dog. These are not things that they really understand, especially as a pup. And so you're giving a dog heck for something it doesn't know, unless you catch it right in that moment. That course correction, right, shouldn't be happening. And then there should be that understanding, if it's a puppy, that it is going to pee on the floor every once in a while. Okay, so back to the main branch of the tree, and having that free choice, and learning by my mistakes, and solving my own problems, and earning my own money, and buying my own clothes, and keeping my room clean, and even in my own education, like, that was left to me. If I wanted to be an A student or an F student, I was basically in a D and an E student, right? I got us out of school pretty fast and pretty much stayed out of school. But those were the choices that I made, right? Because I had free choice, right? I shouldn't have had free choice, but it was an experiment. I'm assuming it was an experiment uh, that didn't serve me very well, because I didn't have any guidance in that. I didn't have any mentorship in that, but I did have influence. And that's what I want to say about that freedom, that sometimes we think we have freedom, that we get to have free choice. But the thing is, the choices are coming from a platter. The choices are coming from out there. They're being presented to us as an offering to decide whether or not that's going to be a choice for us, right? Rather than just sitting with ourselves or going off by ourselves and deciding for ourselves in that we allow ourselves to be influenced and quite often manipulated. I call it sheep herding, right? I want you there. I want you there. How do I get you there? When it's your free choice, right? Oh, that looks like an easy job. Oh my goodness, right? Look at that chair. It looks so comfy, much better than standing on my feet for 8 hours. Oh my goodness, lucky person who gets that job, right? I don't know. I'm just doing an example. But and then somebody goes, "Oh, yeah. Right?" And the next thing you know, they're sitting over there all by themselves and everybody's getting promoted up the line and you're not. You're stuck in a corner off by yourself doing something that somebody else intended you to do, but in your head and in your mind and in your reality of what is, right? You made that choice. You allowed yourself to be either influenced or manipulated into that. Remember what I was saying when I came in early tonight? It's the sale, right? It's how we move people along. That's how we control our vicinities and our aerospace of each one of our lives, that we get to dictate this space, right? Because we can't dictate anybody else's, but the thing is we become so boundaried that we can't even get close to each other anymore. And then all we're doing is connecting this way online and not really truly connecting in real life. And that is one of the goals for me this year, is to work on some of those relationships that are important for me, recognizing it takes all kinds to make the world, right? We're all in different stages of our evolution, and it's going to take a while until we're all on the same plane, right? And if we don't get all onto the same plane, then maybe it would be like, when the Neanderthals became extinct and only the Homo sapiens are left over, right? At one time, there were like 15 or 20 different humans, species going on at the same time. And now it's just us, right? With little touches of Neanderthal and Denisovan, and then some of those really archaic kind of genes that, for the Homo erectus and some of those very first ones, right? That popped up. Okay, you guys. I'm all brained out here. I don't know if there was anything. I'm going to have to come in and watch for myself. Hello, Eugene. Thank you. Oh, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you too, Eugene. Very much appreciate that you said that. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you for the thumbs up. But freedom, it's really strange. This word has come across my path numerous times today. But when I remember, I delved into a little bit earlier this afternoon, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, that word again, right? Didn't we have this word yesterday? I'm not quite sure if it was yesterday's word or the day before. It was very, very recent, right? But when I was thinking about it today, I was thinking about, yeah, lots of us, we think we have that freedom, but in reality, it's the choices that we make in the platters of our lives. And that's the tricky part, as human souls, right? Because there is a grand plan for us. But because as humans, we have those, right, moments where we get to make a choice. And lots of us make bad choices consistently over and over and over again. And hopefully, right, after a while, we get the hang of it and they don't become failures or mistakes anymore. But when we think about this freedom, we really have to make sure that the choices that we're making are choices that we're making, and not because somebody wanted you sitting over at that table over there, right? That somebody wanted you to do some overtime, or somebody wanted spaghetti and meatballs for dinner and you just felt like opening up a can of soup. I don't know. Freedom. I'm going to assume freedom's going to pop up again in the cards in shortly if I didn't get it right yet. But yeah, I think, because I was thinking about it this afternoon and I was saying, we think sometimes that we have that freedom of free choice, but it's not necessarily always true, right? Because you know it's in the character's presentation of different ideas. It is, if somebody says that, oh my goodness, so and so down the street, oh, he's so mean, he's yelling at the kids and threatening and phoning the police and stuff, right? Wouldn't that affect your choice whether or not to walk down that side of the sidewalk? Right? More than likely, you're going to choose the other side of the sidewalk. And maybe that was just somebody with a different opinion, somebody that truly didn't get along with him, not because he was a bad person, just because they didn't get along. It happens, right? I always judge people how they treat me, not necessarily how they treat other people. But if they treat other people not nicely, right, around my vicinity, right, I have to jump in to that, right? Because it's well, it's part of me now, right? That you find sometimes that in your own experiences that you don't want others to find themselves in those same experiences, and because of those baseline values, right, they become boundaries at some point. I didn't mean to say it like that, like boundaries, stay away, right? I think it's for the good of all. And I think in that clear communication to the people that are in our lives that we can, right? I think we can respect each other's way of living. I'm moving out of it in my own family. I talk about some pretty heavy subjects that my sisters have no idea about. And I could have these conversations until I'm blue in the face. And they would just sit there with a big blank look on their face. But I can have those conversations now. It's not a battle in that anymore because there is that acceptance of each other. And I think that's a good start in healing relationships, in getting back on the track, in moving forward in our evolution, in creating the best human being we possibly can. Okay, you guys, I'm gonna come in. I'm gonna come in and watch the live. I'm sure there's a lesson for me there, especially when that word freedom came up again. It better not be like that word community. You guys have a great night, and we'll see you tomorrow. Oh, I like baked spaghetti and I love stew. And I like garlic too. I thought I've never had roasted garlic before, and I thought I'd pick up some garlic cloves and try it and then smear it on toast or something, see if I liked it. But I do like garlic, but I usually am using them as the spices, and I don't usually use the fresh garlic. Mind you, before I go, let me show you what I'm growing. When we talk about these kinds of things, look at, it's a green onion, you guys. Cindy's got a green thumb. It had a little green popping up. I've been growing it for about a week. I'm going to make some egg salad sandwiches. Okay, you guys. That's my good cheer. Have a great night.